Move that eyesore or we'll start the lean process, Patricia said, heels clipping my driveway like a metronome. Your ramp violates aesthetic uniformity. Final notice. Emily's breath hitched beside me. The late summer heat pressed down, cicadas buzzing like a warning. I looked at the wooden rails my father and I had sanded smooth. You're calling safety an eyesore? She smirked. Rules are rules. Pregnant or not, compliance is mandatory. I didn't raise my voice. Patricia, those rails sit inside the recorded utility easement. The setback you're quoting doesn't apply to accessibility features built to ADA slope ratios. Also, I'm a structural engineer who writes municipal compliance specs for a living. The air shifted. Officer Doyle stopped pretending to study the mailbox. A neighbor paused mid-sprinkler adjustment. It wasn't a victory, just a crack. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. She scoffed, but her eyes flickered. Credentials don't exempt you. True, I said, but facts do. Your uniformity clause can't override life safety standards, and your board skipped the required notice and hearing sequence before issuing fines. That makes your threats unenforceable. I breathed in the resin scent from the ramp. Calm, steady. Name's Daniel Ruiz. My dad, Carlos, built ramps for veterans when no one else would. He taught me load paths and dignity in the same afternoon. He died last year, and this wood is the last thing he and I planned together. Emily needs it now, and our son, when he arrives, may too. You can pull a form or file a motion, but you don't get to erase a promise. Wind brushed the palo verde, scattering yellow petals across the planks. Emily rested a hand on the rail, knuckles pale. I remembered the night she slipped on the old steps and the way the world narrowed to the thud and my helpless breath. Since then, every screw in this ramp had been a prayer with threads and torque. Patricia's clipboard hovered like a gavel. We'll revisit this at the board meeting. You already visited it, I said. 3 fines, 0 lawful hearings, and a threat to shut Emily out of the clinic lobby because of non-compliance. That's not enforcement, that's harassment. And now you put it in writing twice. Her lips thinned. Doyle shifted his weight. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez pretended to clip bougainvillea and missed every third snip. Sweat traced my spine, but my voice stayed even. Here's what happens next, I said. You'll try to turn the neighborhood against us with the word uniformity. I'll show them what uniform neglect looks like in a pool fence that doesn't meet egress spacing, a fire lane with illegal bollards, and a drainage swale that backs water onto 3 lots when it rains. I won't. Need slogans. I'll bring measurements, Patricia bristled. Are you threatening litigation? I'm promising accuracy. Emily squeezed my fingers. Daniel, I've got us, I said, then looked back at Patricia. And I've got them too, the families you fined into silence. The cicadas surged. The neighborhood held its breath. Where are you watching from? I stepped onto the ramp. The boards thudded under my weight, every joist exactly where it should be. You chose the wrong person to pressure into tearing out life safety, I said. You can write me up today. Tomorrow, I start writing back, in numbers you can't argue with. Patricia turned, heels ticking toward the sidewalk. Doyle followed. Papers fluttered against her clipboard. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez finally cut a stem clean. The snap was sharp. I rolled my shoulders once, feeling the grit of sawdust memory in the bend of my elbow. The heat didn't lift, but something inside me did, settling into a balance I trusted more than any bylaw. Tomorrow would be measurements, photographs, and witnesses, and facts were my home field. The next morning, the pool pavilion felt less like a place for swimming and more like a bulletin board of threats. Laminated notices curled under the Arizona sun, each stamped with the red HOA seal like a warning brand. Non-compliant lawn length. Unauthorized plant species. Improper holiday lights. The list stretched down the corkboard like an inventory of control. Kids splashed nearby, their laughter rising against a wall of rules, and neighbors shuffled past without meeting eyes. I scanned the papers, pulse tight. Emily stood a step behind me, one hand on her belly, eyes darting across the fines. They fined the Thompsons for a slide, she whispered. That's for their daughter's therapy. The page listed unauthorized play equipment in neat, cold type. "That's Patricia," I said quietly. "Weaponizing the bylaws against whoever can't push back." A gust rattled the plastic sleeves, the notices slapping like restless flags. Families passed by, faces tight, lips pressed. No one stopped to tear a notice down. Fear kept their hands still. Patricia appeared at the far end of the pavilion, clipboard clutched like a shield. She smiled at a couple walking their dog, then shot me a glance sharp enough to slice. I stayed rooted, watching her slip another notice onto the board. Unauthorized political sign. I didn't even have to look to know which neighbor that belonged to. Mr. Ramirez, whose son had just enlisted. My stomach knotted. The water in the pool shimmered turquoise, a postcard hiding fractures underneath. Kids splashed and laughed, but even they went quiet when Patricia's heels clicked across the concrete. She thrived in silence, in neighbors shrinking back. I wasn't going to shrink. "Daniel," she said, her tone sweet but cutting, "still haven't resolved your ramp violation. Non-compliance escalates penalties." She pinned another notice with a practiced stab of her thumbtack. I glanced at Emily. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed quiet. I turned back to Patricia. "Your notices are piling higher than your legal grounds." The words carried across the pavilion. Heads turned. Mrs. Alvarez paused mid-conversation, her pruning shears tucked under her arm. A teenager floating on a pool noodle stopped paddling. Everyone heard it, and that was the point. Patricia tilted her head, lips curling. "Threats don't work here. Neither do scare tactics," I said, "especially when they target medical needs or military families." I tapped the notice about Mr. Ramirez's sign. The plastic crinkled under my knuckle. "Some of these fines aren't just petty. They're unlawful." The silence thickened. Somewhere a lifeguard blew a whistle, but no one looked away. Patricia straightened her blazer, the heat already spotting her forehead with shine. "We'll see what the board says," she muttered, walking off without her usual smirk. Emily exhaled, voice low. "They're scared of her." "Everyone is?" I nodded. "That fear's the glue. Break it, and the board's power crumbles." The smell of chlorine lingered as neighbors drifted closer, hesitant. Mrs. Alvarez brushed her palms against her shorts. "She fined me last week for shade cloth. Said it violated visual consistency." Her voice cracked. "It keeps my husband cool, his heart." I put a hand on the bulletin board. "This isn't about consistency. It's about control. But control only works if we stay quiet." I looked around at the faces, drawn and tired. "I'm done being quiet." The pool water rippled, reflecting light across the notices like they were already burning away. The fear was still there, heavy as the heat, but something had shifted. A few neighbors nodded slowly. Emily touched my shoulder, steadying me and herself. The ramp was personal, but now the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't just my fight. "Where are you watching from?" Because standing in that pavilion, with Patricia's papers fluttering and neighbors finally lifting their eyes, I realized this wasn't only about saving a ramp. It was about saving a community held hostage by red stamps and fear. And I wasn't walking away. The HOA office always smelled like toner and old carpet glue, the kind of place where sunlight came in through blinds but never felt warm. Emily waited in the car while I stepped inside. Patricia's voice carried from the boardroom down the hall, measured, sharp, slicing through the murmur of other members. I slowed near the doorway, eyes catching on Marcus Chen, seated a few chairs down. His tie was crooked, his hand tapping nervously against a stack of minutes. Patricia clicked her pen like a gavel. Unanimous agreement. Fines escalate until compliance is reached. No exceptions. The other. Board members nodded, some quick, some reluctant. Marcus stared at the tabletop, his jaw flexed, his knuckles white. I leaned against the wall, watching him wrestle. He didn't look at me, but I saw the flicker of conscience. Sweat beaded at his temple despite the office AC groaning overhead. When Patricia called for a vote, his hand rose last, shaking slightly. The motion passed. Papers shuffled. Chairs scraped. Patricia strode out first, satisfied, heels tapping like victory drums. She saw me, smirked, and swept by without a word. The others followed, eyes avoiding mine. Marcus lingered. He stacked his notes with trembling fingers, then paused. His lips parted as if to speak, but closed again. He looked up, saw me still leaning in the hall, and flinched. His Adam's apple bobbed. For a second, guilt washed across his face like a storm cloud. Then he shoved the papers into his folder and hurried past. I didn't block his path. I didn't need to. His struggle was loud enough in the way he avoided my eyes, in the stiffness of his shoulders as he left the building. I followed him outside, the heat slamming into us both. He fumbled with his keys, dropped them, cursed under his breath. When he finally got the door open, he sat behind the wheel and just sat. Hands gripping the steering wheel, forehead resting on the rim. From the car beside me, Emily watched quietly. She didn't need to ask what I saw. She saw it too, someone caught in Patricia's web, but straining at the threads. I walked back to our own car, every step echoing the truth. Marcus wasn't our enemy. Not really. He was a man being pulled apart between decency and duty, trapped in a role that demanded silence. And silence had already cost too much in this neighborhood. The engine of Marcus's sedan sputtered, then roared. He drove off fast, too fast for a narrow street lined with parked cars and trimmed hedges. But his face, pale and tight behind the windshield, stayed burned in my mind. Inside our car, Emily whispered, "He's braking." I nodded. And when he finally does, Patricia won't be ready. The ramp back home gleamed in the sunset light, golden lines across the planks. I touched the rail, rough under my palm. Marcus's hesitation was more than doubt. It was a crack forming in the wall Patricia had built, and cracks spread. Where are you watching from? Because that was the night I realized the board itself might supply my first ally, whether Marcus wanted to admit it or not. The clinic lobby should have been a place of relief. Cool air drifted from the vents, the hum of fluorescent lights steady overhead. Families sat in chairs lined against beige walls, children clutching juice boxes, nurses moving briskly with clipboards. Emily's breathing was shallow, one hand steadying herself against my arm as we walked in. We didn't even reach the receptionist's desk before Patricia's voice sliced through the calm. "Stop right there. You're not allowed in here." She stood near the entrance, blazer crisp despite the heat outside, clipboard in hand like always. Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" Patricia's chin lifted. Non-compliant homeowners don't have access to shared community medical facilities. Liability. Until your ramp is removed and fines paid, you're barred. Murmurs rippled across the room. A nurse froze mid-step, staring. My pulse hammered in my ears. "She's 8 months pregnant," I said, my voice low. "She has every right to be here." Patricia's lips curled. "Rules are rules. This isn't personal, it's policy." I stepped closer, the polished floor cool beneath my shoes, my shadow stretching across her clipboard. "Policy doesn't trump the Fair Housing Act, or the ADA. You're making this personal, Patricia." Emily swayed, gripping the counter for balance. A nurse rushed forward, glaring at Patricia but hesitant to interfere. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the soft beeps from a heart monitor down the hall. Every pair of eyes in the lobby was on us. Patricia's voice wavered, just slightly. "You'll regret testing the board." "Maybe," I said. "But you'll regret trying to drag a pregnant woman out of a clinic. People are watching, and cameras don't lie." Her face stiffened. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd lash out again. Instead, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the glass doors hissing shut behind her. The room exhaled. The nurse touched Emily's shoulder. "Let's get you checked." Emily leaned into me, whispering, "She's crossing every line now." "I know." My throat burned. "And the more reckless she gets, the more exposed she'll be." We sat while the nurse took Emily's vitals. The faint smell of antiseptic filled the air, mixing with the tension still clinging to the room. My hands clenched into fists against my knees. Patricia had turned harassment into endangerment, and that changed everything. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic look. "You should file a complaint." I nodded slowly. "Not just a complaint." Evidence. Emily squeezed my hand, her skin cold against mine. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice steadied. "She's not just targeting us. You saw the faces in that room." She was right. The murmurs, the shifting gazes, the nurse's hesitation. Every witness had seen Patricia cross a line too far. Fear might have silenced them before, but fear couldn't erase what they just watched. As we left the clinic, the desert sun slammed down again, heat radiating off the asphalt. Emily held my arm tighter. "Daniel, promise me we'll finish this." "I promise." "Where are you watching from?" Because that was the moment I stopped thinking of this fight as just protecting my family. Patricia had turned it into something bigger, something that could bring her entire wall of control crashing down. The sun had dropped lower, painting the subdivision in long, amber streaks when I cut across the walkway near the pool fence. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was just walking home from the clinic with my mind still buzzing, Emily resting at the house. But something caught my eye. The gate latch, supposed to be at least 54 inches high for child safety, sat level with my chest, too low. A kid could pop it open with ease. I crouched, fingers brushing the metal. The welds were uneven, slag marks where there should have been smooth seams. My pulse picked up. This wasn't just sloppy, it was illegal. City code was clear. Barrier spacing, latch height, gate swing direction. None of it matched. A boy chased a ball along the deck, slamming into the gate. It swung inward, into the pool area, instead of out toward the deck. My chest tightened. That was a drowning risk. Someone had signed off on this, or ignored it. Patricia's rules about holiday lights suddenly looked like a distraction compared to this. She'd spent months threatening families over shrubs and playsets, while this hazard sat in plain sight. And if she'd known, that was negligence with teeth. I pulled a tape measure from my pocket, habit of an engineer who never left home without tools. The latch height read 47 inches. I scribbled it on a receipt, hands shaking. 47, not compliant, not even close. Behind me, the water filters hummed, a low vibration through the deck. I checked the fence spacing, more than 4 inches between verticals. Another violation. And the drain covers near the deck? Outdated, no anti-entrapment rating. I swallowed hard. Every detail screamed corner cutting, shortcuts Patricia never mentioned during her crusades for uniformity. Mrs. Alvarez walked by with her pruning shears still in hand, pausing when she saw me kneeling at the gate. "Something wrong?" "Plenty," I said. "This fence could get a child killed." Her eyes widened. "But Patricia said it passed inspection." I stood, dusting off my jeans. Inspections only matter if they're real. Someone signed off without checking, or the board skipped it. I looked back at the shimmering pool, suddenly sinister in its quiet. "If the city finds out, fines will make my ramp look like pocket change." She lowered her voice. "Should I tell anyone?" "Not yet," I said. "Let me gather it right." The air smelled of chlorine and sun-baked concrete. I jotted measurements, angles, the gate swing direction. My hands moved on instinct, every number like a nail in Patricia's coffin. She thought I was just another homeowner arguing over aesthetics. She had no idea I was documenting violations that could dismantle her authority. The ball the boy had dropped rolled against my foot. I picked it up, handed it back to him. His grin was careless, innocent. My chest tightened again. That fence wasn't just non-compliant, it was dangerous. And the danger wasn't theoretical. As I walked home, the ramp came into view, golden in the fading light. Emily waved from the porch, her smile weary but steady. I touched the rail before climbing up. "It's bigger than us now," I murmured. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't have to. "Where are you watching from?" Because tonight, I'd found Patricia's weak point, and the beauty of code violations was that they didn't bend to fear, power, or smug smiles. Numbers told the truth, and I knew how to read them. The ER waiting room buzzed with the kind of low-level chaos you only notice when you're sitting still. Phones rang behind glass, shoes squeaked across linoleum, and the antiseptic smell clung to everything like static. Emily slumped against my shoulder, pale, her breath short and uneven. The confrontation at the clinic had rattled her more than she admitted, and now the weight of it pressed down on both of us. A nurse wheeled by with a tray, the rattle of instruments echoing in my chest. I tightened my grip on Emily's hand. "Stay with me," I whispered. Her eyes fluttered, but she squeezed back, a fragile anchor in the noise. I couldn't shake the image of that pool fence. 47 inches. Illegal welds. A gate swinging the wrong way. My mind replayed the numbers while my wife fought to stay steady. Patricia had the audacity to call a ramp an eyesore while letting lethal hazards sit untouched. It wasn't just hypocrisy, it was reckless endangerment. And now, with Emily trembling beside me, it felt personal in a way I couldn't ignore. The overhead speaker crackled with another name called, another patient pulled into the maze of hallways. I held my ground in the hard plastic chair, jaw locked. I thought of my father, of the way he'd scold me for cutting corners on measurements. An inch, he'd say, is the difference between safe and sorry. Patricia had ignored more than inches. She'd gambled with lives. Emily shifted, her voice faint. Daniel, don't let her win. I brushed hair from her damp forehead. I won't. I promise. That word, promise, settled into me like rebar poured into concrete. It was more than comfort. It was commitment. The ramp wasn't just wood and screws anymore. It was a line I refused to let Patricia erase, a stand that now carried the weight of my father's legacy, my wife's safety, and the quiet trust of every neighbor afraid to speak. The waiting room's TV droned with muted news, headlines scrolling about city council budgets and safety ordinances. I caught the word compliance flashing at the bottom of the screen. A reminder, uninvited but clear. This fight wasn't going to be won with anger or shouting matches. It would be won with precision, with proof, with the kind of expertise Patricia couldn't argue against, no matter how smug her smile. Emily dozed against my shoulder, her breath steadier now. I stroked her arm, eyes burning. My chest swelled with equal parts fear and resolve. She was the reason. I'd finish this, not for pride, not for reputation, because the person I loved most needed me to hold the line. A receptionist called our name, and a nurse appeared with a wheelchair. I stood, steadying Emily as she sat. The nurse smiled softly. We'll take care of her. I know, I said, but my voice carried more steel than gratitude, because while the staff would care for Emily tonight, it was on me to make sure she never had to face that kind of cruelty again. The automatic doors slid open as they wheeled her back, the hiss sounding like a promise sealing shut. I stood there alone in the waiting room, fists tight at my sides, my reflection warped in the plexiglass divider. Patricia had crossed the line at the clinic, and now Emily was paying the price in exhaustion, stress, and fear. Where are you watching from? Because this was the night my fight became absolute. No more waiting, no more hoping someone else would intervene. Patricia had made it personal, and I was done holding back. Tomorrow, the numbers would start talking, and when they did, her empire of fear would start to crack. Marcus's woodworking shed smelled of cedar and motor oil, the air thick with sawdust that clung to my shirt the moment I stepped inside. A single bulb swung overhead, casting shadows across stacks of half-finished shelves and neatly arranged tools. Marcus stood by the workbench, shoulders stiff, hands resting on the edge like he needed the wood beneath his palms to anchor him. He didn't look up right away. The rasp of sandpaper carried through the quiet, each stroke too fast, too sharp. Finally, he dropped it and exhaled hard. You shouldn't be here, he muttered. I closed the door behind me, the hinges squealing. I think you want me here, Marcus. Otherwise, you wouldn't have called. His laugh was dry, humorless. You think I called because I want trouble? I called because I can't sleep anymore. Every time Patricia opens her mouth, I hear my own silence echoing louder. I stepped closer, eyeing the wood grain under his fingers. You signed off on the pool fence. His head jerked up, guilt plain in his eyes. She pushed it through. Said delays cost money. I knew it wasn't right, Daniel, but his voice cracked. I went along. Now every time I see kids running around that deck, I picture one of them slipping under that gate. The bulb swayed, shadows cutting across his face. He looked smaller in that moment, weighed down by the truth he'd carried too long. You're not the villain here, I said quietly. But you can't sit in silence while Patricia buries the neighborhood in fines and hides violations that could kill someone. He grabbed a rag, twisted it in his hands. You don't get it. Patricia has dirt on all of us. Missed dues, old permits, favors she twisted into leverage. If I speak up, I lose everything. You've already lost sleep, I said. How much longer before you lose? Your conscience? His eyes flicked to me, then down again. Silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of a cicada outside. He reached for a folder shoved under a pile of scrap wood, hesitated, then slid it across the bench. His fingers lingered on the cover before pulling back. Inside were board meeting notes, signatures, stamped approvals, pages that proved corners had been cut and inspections bypassed. "This is what you're looking for," he whispered, "but if you use it, you never got it from me." I closed the folder gently. "I don't need to use your name. I just need the truth." Marcus pressed his palms to his face. "You don't understand? She'll come after me if she even suspects." "She's already coming after me," I said. "And my wife. If you stand with us, you won't be standing alone." His hands dropped. His expression was torn, fear and relief wrestling for control. "If this blows up, Daniel, it's on you." "No," I said, tucking the folder under my arm. "It's on Patricia. All we're doing is pulling the curtain back." The bulb flickered, then steadied. Marcus sank onto a stool, shoulders sagging. "God help me," he murmured. I turned toward the door, the weight of the folder solid against my ribs. "You've already helped more than you know." Outside, the desert night pressed hot and still, the stars faint against city glow. I breathed deep, the air thick with dust and promise. Marcus had crossed the line from silence to action, even if he couldn't admit it out loud. And with his confession, I had the missing piece. "Where are you watching from?" Because tonight, the wall Patricia built started to crack, not from my hammer, but from one of her own bricks giving way. The drafting room at my firm smelled of ink and paper, the hum of plotters filling the silence as I unrolled Marcus's folder across the wide table. Under fluorescent light, the stamped approvals glared up at me like lies in black and white. My pen scratched across tracing paper as I overlaid measurements, recalculated tolerances, and lined them against municipal code. Every number told the same story, negligence wrapped in signatures. I pulled my father's old steel ruler from my bag, its edges worn smooth from decades of use. He'd trusted precision more than promises. And tonight, I felt him at my shoulder. 47 inches instead of 54. Gate swinging inward instead of outward. Drainage slope off by 2 degrees, enough to back water into 3 adjoining lots. They weren't mistakes. They were shortcuts, approved by a board that called my ramp a violation while they cut corners in secret. I highlighted line items, building a map of contradictions. Patricia wanted uniformity. I'd give her uniform failure, laid bare for the court. One sheet showed fire lane bollards placed too close for emergency vehicles. Another revealed fencing specs ignored entirely. My notes bled across the margins, arrows, linking every violation. The more I marked, the clearer the picture became. Patricia had been betting on silence, on neighbors too scared or untrained to notice. But I wasn't guessing. I was proving. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was an expert witness in the making. I leaned back, rubbing my temples as the clock ticked past midnight. Emily's face flickered in my mind, pale in the clinic lobby, her hand clutching mine. I thought of Marcus, head in his hands, confessing through clenched teeth. This wasn't just math. It was marrow-deep responsibility. If I didn't carry it, nobody would. I drafted diagrams, clean, clear, undeniable. Measurements printed bold. Photos would come next, but the bones were here. Any inspector worth their license would call it what it was, a pattern of willful non-compliance. And when those numbers hit the courtroom, Patricia's clipboard would look flimsy as cardboard. The plotter whirred, spitting out fresh sheets. The paper smelled sharp, new, like the first breath after a storm. I stacked each print, aligning edges with care, every page a brick in the wall I was building against her. Not intimidation, not threats. Just truth she couldn't wriggle out of. The desk lamp cast my shadow across the diagrams, stretching long, steady. For the first time since this fight began, I felt control shifting. Patricia had power through fear. I had power through fact, and facts didn't bend to threats. I slid the ruler back into my bag, brushed eraser dust from the table, and gathered the stack of reports. My pulse slowed, steadied, in rhythm with the weight in my hands. This wasn't theory anymore. This was evidence. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room dark except for the faint glow of exit signs. The silence settled around me, thick but calm. Tomorrow, I'd bring the camera, the tape measure, the witnesses. Tonight, I carried the proof. Where are you watching from? Because with every line I drew, Patricia's empire shrank. And soon, she wouldn't be able to hide behind rules or fines. Numbers had their own kind of gravity, and hers were about to collapse. The park gazebo creaked under the weight of evening. String lights glowed overhead, casting soft halos across the picnic table, where I spread out diagrams and photographs. The woods smelled faintly of rain from a storm earlier in the week, damp but grounding. Around me, neighbors leaned in, their whispers carrying the nervous edge of people who'd lived too long under Patricia's shadow. Emily sat close, a blanket over her lap, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She didn't need to speak. Her presence said enough. Beside her, Mrs. Alvarez adjusted her glasses, eyes wide as she scanned the photos of the pool fence. She told us everything was up to code, she whispered. I tapped the measurement written in black ink. 47 inches, not 54. That's not a minor miss. It's a direct violation. And if a child drowns, the liability lands on every homeowner because of her negligence. Gasps rippled. A man I barely knew clenched his fists. She fined me for repainting my trim 2 shades off her approved chart. And she let this slide? I shifted another page forward. Photos of drainage swales backing into driveways after rain. Marcus's notes confirming board approvals without inspections. This isn't about my ramp. It's about a board cutting corners and punishing families to cover it up. They've put everyone's property and lives at risk. Marcus hovered at the edge of the group, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. He hadn't spoken since arriving, but the tension in his face betrayed the war inside him. When Mrs. Alvarez looked his way, he gave a small, reluctant nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what I was saying. Emily's voice was soft but steady. If Patricia will drag a pregnant woman out of a clinic, do you really think she cares about protecting our kids at the pool? The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the lights and the faint chirp of crickets. Then someone spoke. What do we do? I leaned forward, palms flat on the diagrams. We build a record she can't bury. Testimonies, photos, measurements. If you've been fined unfairly, document it. If you've seen unsafe conditions, write them down. When this hits the courtroom, it won't just be my ramp against Patricia. It'll be an entire neighborhood's truth. Whispers grew louder, voices overlapping. Fear still clung to them, but it was cracking. Neighbors pulled out phones, snapped pictures of the evidence. One woman scribbled on a notepad. A man muttered about contacting his insurance company. The air shifted, like dry brush catching the first spark. Marcus finally spoke, voice raw. She'll come after anyone who stands up. She already has, I said. But if we stand together, she can't isolate us anymore. And when the violations hit the record, the city and the court won't look away. The group fell quiet, the weight of choice pressing down. Then Mrs. Alvarez set her pruning shears on the table like an offering. I'm in. One by one, others nodded, their resolve hardening. Emily squeezed my hand, eyes shining. I gathered the stack of notes and photos, tucking them into a folder. The papers felt heavier than steel in my hands. This wasn't just preparation, it was momentum. Patricia had ruled through fear, but fear was giving way to proof, and proof was contagious. As we left the gazebo, the light swayed gently in the breeze. The park stretched quiet and wide, but I could feel the shift humming beneath the ground, waiting. Where are you watching from? Because that night, under string lights and whispered vows, we built the foundation Patricia could never tear down. And soon, her clipboard wouldn't be enough to silence us. The courthouse lobby smelled of polished stone and coffee left too. Long on a warmer, my footsteps echoed off marble tiles as I carried the evidence binder tight against my chest, the weight of diagrams, photos, and testimonies pressing into my ribs. Emily walked beside me, moving carefully, her hand sliding along the smooth rail as though each step was an act of defiance. Marcus trailed a few paces behind, head down, tie already loosened. He looked like a man marching to his own sentencing. But he was here, and that mattered. Mrs. Alvarez stood near the metal detectors, pruning shears tucked away in her purse, her quiet solidarity radiating more strength than she knew. Patricia swept in from the opposite doors, heels striking like hammers, clipboard in hand. She carried herself like a queen entering her court, lips curled, eyes sharp. Behind her, 2 other board members whispered, their smugness brittle. Patricia caught sight of me and smirked, mouthing the word, "Checkmate." I didn't flinch. I pressed the folder tighter, because I knew what was inside wasn't just paper. It was leverage she couldn't twist. The bailiff called for order, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. People streamed past us. Attorneys with briefcases, parents corralling kids, city workers clutching files. Amid the bustle, I felt the hum of nerves buzzing under my skin, but beneath it all was steel. Emily's whisper cut through the noise. "Whatever happens in there, remember why you're doing this." I met her eyes. "I remember." The clerk handed me a slip confirming our docket number. The paper crinkled in my sweaty palm, but I breathed slow, steady. This wasn't anger. This wasn't about pride. This was about fact, precision, truth lined up in rows of numbers and measurements that didn't bend to intimidation. Across the lobby, Patricia laughed at something whispered in her ear. The sound grated, sharp and dismissive. But for the first time, I didn't feel cornered. I felt ready. Marcus finally spoke, voice hoarse. "If I get called, I'll tell the truth. I don't care anymore." I clapped his shoulder, feeling the tremor in his frame. "That's all anyone needs you to do." The overhead lights buzzed, reflecting off brass fixtures. The whole lobby seemed to hold its breath as the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. My pulse steadied with each inhale. Evidence ready. Witnesses ready. Neighbors ready. Patricia strode past us, perfume sharp, her clipboard brushing my arm as if to remind me who she thought held control. I let her pass, because control wasn't in the swagger of heels or the flash of fines. It was in the measurements written on page after page inside my binder. Emily squeezed my hand, grounding me. Her touch reminded me of the ramp at home, the wood still warm from the sun, the rails that carried both her weight and my father's memory. That ramp was more than an object. It was a promise in timber and screws, a promise I'd sworn to defend. The clerk's voice rang out, "Ruiz v. Lanning, Homeowners Association." Board heads turned, my name carried across the marble like the strike of a gavel. I stepped forward, binder in hand, every step deliberate, every breath steady. Patricia tilted her head, still smirking, but I caught the twitch in her jaw, the faint tremor in her fingers as she gripped her clipboard tighter. "Where are you watching from?" Because in that lobby, with the doors opening and the crowd pressing in, I felt the scales shift. Patricia thought this was her arena, but the moment I laid those diagrams before the court, it would become mine. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of chill that seeped into your skin and made every movement sharper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the wooden benches creaked as neighbors filled them one by one. Mrs. Alvarez clutched her purse like a lifeline. Marcus sat rigid in the witness row, and Emily rested a hand on her belly, eyes locked on me. Patricia strutted in like she owned the place, heels biting against the polished floor. She set her clipboard on the table with a snap, her smug smile flashing toward the gallery, as if she'd already won. Her 2 board allies followed, whispering, smirking, feeding off her confidence. Judge Renee Caldwell entered, robes swaying, her presence immediately commanding silence. "Court is in session," she announced. The bailiff's call echoed against paneled walls. My pulse hammered, but I rose with purpose, binder in hand, the weight of every diagram grounding me. Patricia's attorney began first, his words slick and rehearsed. He painted me as a disruptive neighbor, a man unwilling to follow rules, insisting my ramp defied community standards. Every sentence dripped with arrogance. A few board members in the gallery nodded along, but others shifted uncomfortably. Then came the video. My attorney slid the USB across, and the screen lit up with Patricia's hand gripping Emily's arm in the clinic lobby. Gasps erupted, the sound of Patricia's voice, cold, dismissive, barring a pregnant woman from care, filled the room. The gallery stirred, whispers rising, some sharp with outrage. Patricia stiffened, color draining from her face, but she tried to mask it with a roll of her shoulders. When my turn came, I stepped to the stand, binder in hand. My voice was steady. Daniel Ruiz, structural engineer. I laid the first diagram flat, its crisp edges cutting the silence. This is the pool fence. The latch is 47 inches high. Code requires 54. This isn't cosmetic. It's a safety standard meant to prevent child drownings. I flipped to the next page. Measurements, photos, violations stacked one after another. This gate swings inward, non-compliant. Drainage slopes, off by 2 degrees, creates flooding. Fire lane bollards, too close. Emergency vehicles can't pass. Every one of these was approved by this. Bored, murmurs rippled through the gallery. A man in the back muttered, "That's my driveway." Someone else gasped, covering their mouth. Patricia's attorney fumbled for objections, but the judge waved him down. "Mr. Ruiz is qualified to testify as an expert," she ruled. Marcus's name was called. He walked to the stand like a man dragging chains. His voice shook at first, but then he steadied. "Patricia told us to skip inspections. She said delays would cost too much. We signed off because we were afraid of her." His shoulders slumped. I can't stay silent anymore. The room exploded in whispers. Patricia's smirk cracked. She leaned toward her attorney, hissing through clenched teeth. Her clipboard looked suddenly small, just a piece of plastic and paper against the tide of testimony. I stood again, closing the binder with a firm snap. This isn't about a ramp. This is about safety, fairness, and accountability. My family's been harassed, my wife endangered, while real violations were ignored. This community deserves better. Judge Caldwell's gaze swept the room. The gavel struck once, the sound like thunder. "Order! This court has heard enough. Deliberations will be brief." The gallery buzzed, neighbors leaning forward, eyes wide, hope flickering where fear used to live. Emily caught my hand, her grip strong despite the exhaustion in her face. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you've already shown them the truth. Where are you watching from?" Because in that courtroom, with every eye fixed on Patricia's crumbling defense, I knew we were seconds away from the verdict that would change everything. The gavel struck again, sharp as lightning. Judge Caldwell's voice carried steady and unshakable. "This court finds the HOA board, led by Vice President Patricia Lanning, in violation of municipal safety codes and the Fair Housing Act. Fines and liens issued against the Ruiz family are nullified. The accessibility ramp will remain in place as a lawful accommodation. Furthermore, this board is ordered to correct all cited safety violations immediately, subject to city oversight." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few cheers broke the tension. Patricia's face drained of color, her clipboard trembling in her grip. Her attorney whispered furiously, but she snapped the cover shut, the sound brittle as glass. Emily exhaled beside me, tears streaking her cheeks. Her hand pressed against her belly, protective and triumphant at once. "We did it," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, my chest swelling with relief so strong it felt like air after drowning. Across the aisle, Marcus slumped back in his seat, his confession finally unshackled. He looked at me with hollow eyes, but there was something else too. Gratitude. Mrs. Alvarez dabbed at her eyes, murmuring a prayer under her breath. The judge's gavel rang once more. "This court is adjourned." Chairs scraped, voices rose, and the gallery poured into the lobby. Patricia stormed, passed, heels stabbing the floor, fury radiating like heat off asphalt. But no one flinched anymore. Neighbors stared openly, whispers sharp, some even shaking their heads. Her reign of fear had cracked in full daylight. We stepped outside, desert sun spilling golden across the courthouse steps. The ramp at home flashed in my mind, sun-warmed planks, rails smoothed by my father's hand. That ramp had been more than wood. It was memory, promise, defiance. And today, it stood protected not by sentiment, but by law. Neighbors gathered around, voice is louder now, freer. She can't fine us anymore for shade cloths. Those fences, they'll have to fix them. Finally, the fear was gone, replaced by something Patricia couldn't touch: unity. Emily leaned against me, exhaustion in her body, but triumph in her eyes. Your dad would be proud, I nodded, throat tight. He taught me numbers never lie, and neither does a promise. Marcus approached slowly, shoulders sagging, but he extended his hand. You broke her hold, he said quietly. I couldn't, but you did. I shook his hand, firm. You helped more than you think. Mrs. Alvarez joined us, pruning shears peeking from her purse. This neighborhood owes you, Daniel. I looked around at the cluster of faces, neighbors no longer bowed by fear. No, I said. We did this together. This isn't just my win, it's ours. Later that evening we gathered at the community playground. Children laughed on swings, the sound ringing free under the fading sky. The ramp at home waited for us, safe now, its wood glowing in the dusk. But here, under string lights and the buzz of conversation, I felt the real victory. A community no longer shackled. I wrapped my arm around Emily, her belly warm against my side, and breathed deep. Relief mingled with pride, with the certainty that this fight had been more than survival. It had been transformation. Patricia's empire of fear was gone. In its place stood a neighborhood ready to hold its ground. Where are you watching from? If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.